Thank you so much, Mr. Rubat Sarwar, for giving me this opportunity to take part in this webinar. So I'm presenting about can you see my screen?
We can see your screen.
Oh, okay, great. So the title of today's session is Overcoming Climate Risks, Challenges and Solutions for Bangladesh. So mainly we will focus on the achievements of Bangladesh, what we have done over the past few years and what we can do even better. So we can see that over the past few years, our country has made enormous progress in terms of climate change adaptation, especially. We are also doing some mitigation activities, but mainly for adaptation and disaster management, our country is known globally. So we will mainly focus on what our achievements were, what were our achievements, what we did right and what didn't go that well, and how can we improve our situation in the future. So let me first give a little brief about climate change scenario in Bangladesh. So we already know that globally, our country is recognized one of the most, probably the most vulnerable country due to the adverse climate change impacts, especially over the past few years, we have seen that the intensity and frequencies of natural disasters have increased and the damages are also increased. So in terms of climate change induced hazards, we can see that cyclones, salinity, storm surge, drought and drought-like conditions, short duration, heavy rainfall, fog, riverbank and coastal erosion, flood and flash flood, hailstorm, thunderstorm, and even climate change is causing health-related risks over the country. So in terms of these disasters, all the areas are not getting impacted equally. If we can see from this map, I'm briefly going to describe the impacts. Like, for example, in the Howrah region, flash flood is more prominent. And if we go to the coastal region, there's salinity, cyclone, and storm surge, and coastal bank erosion, which are more seen in this area. Then if we go to the Barins area, there is drought and drought-like conditions due to the erratic pattern and increased temperature. On the other hand, if we go to the Chittagong Hill Tracts area, we can see that due to excessive short duration heavy rainfall, the landslides are often observed. And overall, the country faces flood frequently. So these are some of the major disasters that our country is facing, and the climate change is making the scenario even worse day by day. So to overcome this, both the government and the non-government agencies, the researchers, the practitioners, and overall the local people have come to different adaptation practices. Both also in terms of mitigation, our country is doing really great with its lack of funding or inefficient manpower or inefficient technologies. So let me show some of the achievements over the past few years that we have done to overcome the risks and challenges in terms of climate change. So the government has done tremendously well in terms of developing climate change related policies and strategy documents. So it started in 2005 with the preparation of National Adaptation Plan of Actions, which is NAPA, and which the government updated in 2009. And in that same year, Bangladesh prepared Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, BCCSAP, which is considered one of the most important documents for the country. Then in 2014, the country prepared climate fiscal framework where it tried to incorporate the financial investments that can be linked to the climate change related projects or programs. Then in 2015, Bangladesh prepared the nationally determined contributions and the country investment plan for environment, forest, and climate change. And Bangladesh also established a climate change cell in the Department of Environment in 2004, which is incorporating the climate change related activities within the department. And Bangladesh has already submitted its third national communication to the UNFCCC and the NDC in 2021. And currently the country is preparing its national adaptation plan, also the BCC SAP and the BCC GAP, which is the Bangladesh Climate Change Gender Action Plan. These documents are also being updated considering the recent climate change vulnerabilities and experiences from our recent projects. So what we have done in the NDCs, we have included two additional sectors with the previously submitted INDC, which is the agriculture, forestry, and other land use, and the waste sectors, because when we talk about mitigation, we only talk about the energy and power generation or the industrial production. But the government has realized that agriculture, forestry, and land use and waste sectors are also very important if we want to address mitigation properly. So these sectors were also included, and we are now trying to invest more in these sectors and raising awareness. So now, apart from policy, so we're now going to see that some adaptation practices in Bangladesh which have emerged over the past few years. So we have completed, or we have accessed different climate change projects from climate funds like Adaptation Fund or Green Climate Fund, and even from the development partners, we are taking funds to implement climate change projects. For example, there's a project named Ecosystem-Based Adaptation in Haor wetland areas and drought-prone barren tracts, which is funded from the LDC fund. So in this project, ecosystem-based adaptation is highlighted for the Haor and Haor region, which is more vulnerable in terms of flash flood, and in the barren region, which is more vulnerable in terms of drought. So in these projects, the adaptation practices are mainly focused that are environment friendly, that are community led, and managed both the project implementation authority and the communities. And there is the Sustainable Forest and Livelihoods projects from the World Bank, which is very much innovative project by the Forest Department, because this project not only focuses on the afforestation in the coastal shorelands, but also ensures not just coastal shorelands, it focuses on the hill tracts and other overall the country. So with afforestation and other plantation related activities, this project focus on ensuring sustainable livelihoods for the forest dependent communities, so that the plantations or the afforestation that are done under these projects are sustained and not get harmed by the communities. Then there's another project which is currently implemented by UNDP. It was the first Adaptation Fund project approved from Bangladesh. It is the climate adaptation initiatives for climate vulnerable offshore small island and riverine shorelands in Bangladesh. So these projects also focuses on two shore areas. One is in the coastal area and one is in the northwestern area. So in these shorelands, the project aims to enhance the climate resilience of the communities through sustainable disaster resilient housing and embankment repair and livelihood and other activities. And there is another project which is from Green Climate Fund, that enhancing adaptive capacities of coastal communities, especially women, to cope with climate change induced salinity. So in this project also got funded from the Green Climate Fund. So we can see that we are doing really great to access global funds in terms of climate change, and these projects are really doing great with new ideas, because I think all of us are aware that these climate funds impose more focus on environmental and social integration, especially for the gender perspectives and inclusion of indigenous communities, different vulnerable groups, and in this way, the overall dimension of implementation of these projects are quite different than the traditional projects that we are currently implementing in the country. Also, the monitoring mechanisms of these climate change projects are very robust, and the fund authorities try to ensure that the project beneficiaries are actually getting what they need or what the project actually proposed. So the country is also preparing a few more projects. I have given some examples here, like the Forest Department is preparing another similar project, like the Shufal project for Green Climate Fund. Then there's PKSF and for agriculture, and for drought resilient communities, there's another project, and for coastal areas, there's another project. So we can see that different projects are ongoing to access different type of funds. I've only given example from the GCF, but for other funds, Bangladesh is doing really great. So I'm giving here some of the examples of, apart from this Green Climate Fund project, that what we are now trying to include climate change into regular development projects, like the multi-purpose cyclone shelters in the coastal areas. We can see that different organizations along with the government are trying to improve the infrastructure of the cyclone shelters to make it more disaster resilient, especially in terms of climate change. And they are trying to include ramp, wheelchairs, and stretchers so that people can easily get into the shelters. Also, the shelters are becoming more gender inclusive. They're trying to keep separate room for men and women, separate toilets, and space for pregnant and lactating mothers. So these initiatives are encouraging more people to go to the cyclone shelters. Also, they are trying to keep a separate space for livestock and inserting rainwater harvesting and solar panels, so that in case of disasters, people do not suffer from safe drinking water and electricity. Also, the approach roads are being improved so that people can easily get to the multi-purpose cyclone shelter. So definitely these changes are very positive for Bangladesh, that we are now thinking about this while constructing the shelters. Another good example is the coastal green belt. The government is trying to establish a sustainable, continuous coastal green belt along the entire coast of the country. So as part of this initiative, the government is already implementing two projects. One is Shufal and another is coastal newly accredited shores of afforestation in coastal region, including the newly accredited shores of the Bay of Bengal. So under this project, the government is trying to cover most of the areas of the country, but the remaining area is going to be completed by another GCF funded project, which is currently being prepared. So these projects not only focus on establishing the green belts, but also these are emphasizing on the improvements of livelihoods and capacity building of the coastal forest management, so that we not only plant the trees, we ensure that these trees sustain for at least up to 50 years, so that these help us to prevent the damages from natural disaster, or at least reduce the damages from the cyclones and the storm surge. And also the coastal ecosystem will also regenerate if we have this sustainable green belt, because we all know that green belt is a very suitable place for breeding of marine species, especially different fish and shrimps and other marine creatures. So also the animals and birds of the mangroves are very much safe if the forest is sustainable. So this is definitely a very good initiative for the country that we have achieved so far. Now I'm going to give some example of the mitigation activities that we have done. So we have had composting project at Magdwell Dumpstyle, which also included landfill gas extraction and utilization. Then we are doing solar heating systems by Gramin People and similar other organizations. There is afforestation, reforestation, and restoration activities by the government and also by the other NGOs as well. And there is emission reduction through introduction of improved cooking stoves in Bangladesh, which has recently gained popularity all over the country. And there also we are trying to make the brick industry more energy efficient and less polluting sector. So we are also working on that. And there is we are trying to replace the light by energy efficient bulbs or mainly focusing on LEDs all over the country. So this is also another success for the country. And there is another initiative that is solar irrigation pump, which is gaining popularity over the years. And also in terms of transportation, the government is focusing more on multimodal systems or MRT and BRT, and more focusing on public transport systems, so that emissions from transportation sectors is also reduced. So here I am giving an example of the success of solar irrigation. So we can see that a recent publication by Shredder that from the National Solar Energy Roadmap 2021 to 41, that so far 1,872 solar irrigation pumps were installed across the country by different organizations. These organizations include Bangladesh Rural Electrification Board, Infrastructure Development Company Limited, BADC, and Barandam Multipurpose Development Authority, Rural Development Academy. And BREB is currently taken initiative in 2021 to install 2,000 more solar pumps across the country. So these are creating great opportunity for the farmers who are poor and cannot afford to use pumps using fossil fuel. Safe for the environment. So there are examples that we have done very well, but due to time constraint, I am keeping it short. So in brief, I can recommend that there should be special programs in terms of transformative mechanism towards capacity building in a transformative manner. We have seen that Bangladesh is already a very from the local, especially the local vulnerable communities who are getting more change. And while doing so, we need to focus that these initiatives, especially the capacity building initiatives, are gender inclusive, socially inclusive, and leave no one behind. Especially, I think that the local communities should take more part while preparing the projects or while implementation and monitoring activities. The women, the youth, and the children, the persons with disabilities, and even should be a part of the overall process, what to do, and aware of their roles properly, and they can also share their views and their adaptation practices as well. Also, the ecosystem-based adaptation, community-based adaptation should be highlighted, because in our country, people have been living with disasters for ages, so they have their own adaptation practices. So while we develop any project, we need to work with the communities and follow the bottom-up approach, so that these activities are accepted by the communities, as well as more effective and useful for them. And there should be more emphasis on improved and advanced technology, so that we can get advanced technology knowledge among the vulnerable group, make them more aware of these technologies. And lastly, we need to strengthen capacities for accessing, managing, and monitoring climate finance, because there's a huge opportunity for climate finance for Bangladesh. And we already have proven that we can access these funds. So if we can initiate more projects for this type of finance, that can be definitely some positive thing for the country. So let me end here. I'm not taking any more time. We will have more discussions for our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Zarin. That was a powerful keynote. I have taken note of some very important messages that you shared. But I think, some important points, I will come back and we'll have a discussion on gender. You were discussing about the shelters and becoming more gender responsiveness. But in our recent survey, we have seen that women are complaining about harassment at shelter centers. So gender-based violence at shelter centers is a challenge. And also we have heard about, let's say, people with disabilities and people with illnesses. They are not getting paramedic or community health workers support in the shelter centers. So that remains one issue that probably we need to talk about later. You have provided a beautiful picture of all the different projects related to adaptation and mitigation, which is also very helpful, I believe, for the people who are listening. One question that I will ask you, please prepare, we will come back to it, is that with respect to mitigation, every year we're seeing that Bangladesh is becoming more and more drastically challenged because of climate changes. So do you have any measures to say that any situation is improving because of our mitigation measures? I personally do not see how our climate risks are going down. It is increasing every year. So if it's always increasing and the pressure is to mitigate, there's of course this challenge of availing more climate finance. And the question is how much of the climate finance is going to mitigation and how much is going to adaptation, and what would be the mix of between mitigation and adaptation, because we can have drought tolerance, saline tolerant varieties and go on and on about it, but to what degree we will mitigate and to what degree we'll adapt. So think about these questions. I'll come back to you. I will now move on, and my next guest is Dr. Mohammad Ghulam Rabbani, sir. Are you there with me?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you, sir. So Dr. Ghulam Rabbani is head of BRAC KFW Climate Bridge Fund Secretariat. And my question to Dr. Rabbani is what the progress has been on achieving sustainable development goals with respect to climate change, and whether Bangladesh is being able to influence global leaders towards more cooperative policies and implementation. I think the second part is very important, whether we are being listened to by the global leaders. And in that regard, what projects are being undertaken to mitigate the threats of climate change, especially disaster risk management? Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. Excellent session. And I'm very humbled to be here as a panelist to speak on these two questions. Excellent context, Jarin. Thank you so much for giving us this context to deliver our remarks. I see there are two questions, but I would be very brief on the first question, and I'll be more, focused on the second question, because this is field of my interest, and we are also working on this. And I strongly believe that Professor Helal would be the right person for the first question on the sustainable development, and which is very much related to economy. But I will definitely talk on this. And I also like the question that you have asked to Jarin, who was the keynote presenter. What we are exactly doing to address the climate change impact in Bangladesh. Conceptually there are two areas. How we can really address the impact of climate change and threats of climate change. The first one is the adaptation, which is the priority of Bangladesh, which means there are different type of climatic hazards, and those hazards have adverse impacts on different ecosystems and sectors, subsectors, and we need to really adjust with those adverse impacts of climate change. So this is one thing that is called adaptation, and the second portion, which is actually priority for the most of the developed, if not all the developed countries and most of the emerging economic large economies, which are really emitting more. When I say emitting more, is the emission of greenhouse gases, largely happening in most of the developed countries and emerging economies. So to address those impact of climate change, you need to have measures to address the reduction of greenhouse gases. So that is what we call mitigation in climate change discourse. So the government of Bangladesh, if I address the second question, the government of Bangladesh has taken number of initiatives since 2005, or even earlier than 2005, as I can say. The first instrument or the policy document that the government of Bangladesh developed was the National Adaptation Program Action, we call NAPA, and that NAPA was developed during 2003, 4, 5, and we have implemented some of the activities, and we have received some of the fund from different global climate finance. And after that NAPA, we developed the Bangladesh Climate Strategy and Action Plan, which was mentioned by the keynote speaker. And after BCCSAP, we have developed the national communication, third national communication we submitted, which had both adaptation and mitigation chapter. And then we recently submitted enhanced national determined contribution, which is enhanced NDC. So all these 4 major documents, and actually Jareen has talked about a number of policy instruments, but I focus on more 4 policy instruments. And to implement the second document, which is Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, the government established the Bangladesh Climate Change Trust Fund, which has invested more than 700 million. In fact, it will be more than that, invested, to address adaptation and mitigation. But in brief, I can tell you, based on the most recent climate finance, climate finance and sustainable development report of the government of Bangladesh, it shows they are investing approximately $1 billion per year, starting from 2015, as I would say. And if you compare it with the annual budget, it shows like 6 to 7% of the annual budget is going to address climate resilience or climate change adaptation and mitigation. And 75% of these total resources are coming from the domestic resources, which is Bangladesh money, which means the 25% is coming from the different other sources. And in terms of 6 thematic areas of the BCCSAP, the first thematic area is the food security, social protection, health, which is getting approximately 39%. If you consider the last year budget, 39% of the total budget is going for the food security, social protection, and health, followed by the infrastructure, which is the second thematic pillar of the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, which is receiving actually 25.9% of the total budget, which is approximately 25,000 crore taka. So this is the more or less brief picture of the domestic climate finance that we are investing to address both adaptation and mitigation. And in terms of mitigation, as I was saying, 15 to 17% of this 1 billion BDT is going to actually for mitigation and low carbon development. So if you look at last 5 years budget, approximately 15 to 17% going for mitigation and low carbon development. And the total rest amount, which is approximately again 85% money goes to adaptation. But in addition to this domestic climate finance to address both adaptation and mitigation, we have the access to international climate finance, or global climate finance landscape, which was Jarin was mentioning. There are several ways or several international fund we have. The first one is JEF Global Environment Facility. They have established or they are the secretariat of Least Developed Countries Fund, Adaptation Fund, Special Climate Change Fund. So Bangladesh has had access to at least 43 projects, from JEF, to address environment, climate change adaptation and mitigation. And there are some other funds, as you can see, the Climate Investment Fund, which has two specific programs. One is the pilot program on climate resilience, and another one is the scaling up renewable energy program. These two programs, together is supporting Bangladesh with approximately 185 million. PPCR has gave 110 million US dollar, and SREP gave 75 million dollar. And from GCF, it seems we have Bangladesh has received 94.7 million US dollar to address both mitigation and adaptation projects. And of course, out of this 4 project, 1 project focus on mitigation and low carbon development. Is the green financing. Since 2016, the government of Bangladesh has focused on green financing mechanism, and they have declared several notified all the 56 banks and 33 financial institutions several declarations. The first declaration, as I can see, is 5% quota for direct green financing out of total loan disbursement of all banks and financial institutions. So you have to allocate 5% from all loan disbursement from all banks on green financing. And the second thing is the government of Bangladesh actually established climate risk management fund with 10% allocation from the corporate social responsibilities budget from each of the bank and financial institutions. And this money actually goes for 3 major areas: solid waste management projects, rainwater harvesting system, and solar home systems. So these are the areas where actually the government has focused more. And Bangladesh Bank also established refinancing scheme with 2 billion BDT just almost half a decade back. More than half a decade back. So these are the 3 areas that we can explain how government of Bangladesh is focusing to address adaptation and mitigation in country. 3 areas, with domestic finance, with global finance, and also green financing mechanism through different banks and financial institutions. Regarding, if I now come back to the first question, very briefly, from the dashboard of SDG index and from the very recent report of the UNDP and the government of Bangladesh, it seems like Bangladesh has done really well, or they are on track with 3 goals. The number 1 is the end poverty. If you see the example from 2016, 24.3% poverty to upper poverty line, to 20.5% in 2019, which clearly says how the government has made the progress on end poverty. Of course, probably Professor Helal can update more with the recent facts and figures. And regarding quality education, this is also on track. The current SDG index of the dashboard of the SDG index says like that. And regarding SDG 13 on climate action, as I was saying, on climate action, the government of Bangladesh, I would say, if they have not achieved the SDG yet, but at least we can definitely say that they're on track with all mitigation and adaptation initiatives, actions, finance, and all other establishment. And according to recent NDC, the government has enhanced their target, with the request of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and they have made it clear that with the unconditional, target would be to reduce the emission by 6.72%, and with the condition, which means with the support from the development partners, donors, and the different banks and even agencies, they can go with 15.12% of the emission reduction target by 2030. But on the other side, SDG 2, SDG 3, 5, 6, 9, 11, 12, it seems like they're moderately improving, but they need to really focus on more SDG 8, 14, 16, and 17. And I would say I would mention in my as my last point, which is really important, SDG 15, which is life on land. Terrestrial ecosystem and biodiversity loss is really increasing, and we are not really focusing more on protecting our terrestrial ecosystem and biodiversity. I would conclude here, and would be really happy to get some questions if you have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rabbani. There is actually a question for you. Take note of it. We'll get back to it. The question is there a monitoring mechanism set by Bangladesh Bank to ensure the 5% target on green financing? I'll get back to you on that. But I really loved the way you could churn all the numbers from your head, all this distribution of funding. That's brilliant. But I think, this question is now hammering on my head, is that to what degree the balance should be on adaptation and mitigation? Because let's say, if we are incentivizing more of adaptation, then and automatically it might seem that we are removing energy or resources from mitigation to adaptation, and whether this can coexist or whether the incentive should be more on mitigation, less on adaptation. Adaptation can be penalized, I would say. I'm just throwing an idea. Adaptation should be penalized actually, and mitigation should be rewarded so that resources are more allocated to mitigation, which I believe is more sustainable. We will get back to that debate. But let's move on. I have with me Ms. Zahur. Are you there with me?
Yes, can you hear me properly now?
I can. Fantastic. We were having some issues with you, but this is fantastic now. Great. So I'm just give me a second to, yeah. I think I don't know what is happening. Anyways, so somehow I'm not being able to go back to the slide, but that's not a problem. So Ms. Zahur, can I have you on video? I can't see you on video. Yes.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you.
Super. So the question I have with you is related to gender. Oishi has touched on it a little bit, but we know that women are being disproportionately impacted due to climate change, and that is related to their income, that is related to gender-based violence arising from climate change, and so on and so forth. So my question to you is, how do you see the gender dimension of climate change, and what do you think are not being done that should be done?
Okay, thank you all. Good afternoon to all of you. First of all, the very important thing is that we have some misconception with gender, that gender connected with only women. Actually, gender connected with both men and women. So obviously, women can face more difficulties, more problem when due to the climate change or any disaster compared to the men in our society and in the global south. But obviously, when we consider the word gender, on that time we need to prioritize both. in our country's context, we need to be prioritized more to about the women, because women are more vulnerable to the disaster, to the climate change phenomena, to everything. But at first we need to identify this word, and then we can divide it, the what should be connected and what type of problem faced by both men and women due to the different types of disaster arise through the climate change. And then we can actually one after another we can make the solution which is connected with the gender. First, to Jerin and Mr. Rubaiyat both mentioned that in the case of the disaster or in the case of the climate change, we identify that gender-based violence, or in the shelter center, women are facing the problem in different way in the violence, or in the case of other problem issues, because they are not getting the facilities properly. But not only that, this is connected with the disaster only, or in the case of the shelter center. But if we consider due to the climate change phenomena, if the problem arises and people or gender-based problem, on that time it is actually suffered when they are living their own home also. So in our country to the global south, actually all the time female person live behind compared to the male. So in the case of that, we need to identify the both type of problem which is arise due to the climate change and which is connected to the both male and female in different way. And then we have already know that we have gender action plan in our country in 2013, from the 2013, and maybe it need to be revised or revised by this year or the next year. So in that cases, we need to identify by the climate change or climatic hazards, what type of problem arise, what type of problem faced by the man and woman, and then what are the solution or adaptation. At the same time, if we consider in the case of a particular, suppose I'm a PhD researcher and my focus on the coastal areas, gender-based water problem. In that case, now identify that obviously in the case of the water management, women are more responsible in global south, including our country. But at the same time, due to the increase of that problem, now in some areas, male person of the family either directly involvement to manage the water problem or to collect the water. At the same time, indirectly they are also involved. So we need to identify, and then at the same time, for identification purpose, we need to hear from these people of the society. That means when we need to identify the problem, we need to hear from the male people also, or the female person also, and then what is their perception and how can they adapt the problem, how can they make their solution at the same time to increase the awareness, because both are of the society and both are contributing in our problem, but their contributions are different way. So when we hear from their voice or from them, on that time we can identify more practically this what is going on, then we can maybe our solution may be in gender based. In most time in the previously when as I told earlier, that most of the time we identify only women. Obviously women are in problem, like at the same time elderly or the disabled person, but at the same time both sex are in different types of problems. So on that case, we need to identify both type of problem, and we need to clear our conception about the gender. It do not indicate only women, it indicates both.
Can I interrupt a little bit? In that case, can you define the differences of impact between men and women? So what are the specific impact on women and what are the specific impact on men that we need to be aware of?
Okay, so if we consider the problem support in the case of the shelter center, on that time women are facing problem more, because in our society when people are moving to the shelter centers, more families are moving conservative. So in that case also they are facing more problem compared to the man. But that does not mean that women, men are, in the case of the activities, changing of the livelihood pattern, changes comes out for man and woman. So obviously women activities are more home centric. So their change comes out on their activities, because many activities change on that their areas. At the same time, some activities which are practiced by the man, these are also change. So we need to identify both type of changes comes out in the field or in the houses, then we can fix out the problem which is going on.
Maybe just reflection, maybe we need to think about migration in that aspect, because a lot of the men are coming out of the houses and they are being the migrated people for labor, and the decision is heavy on the men's side. And also we know that during a disaster, the men stay back, some of the men stay back at their home to protect the house, and therefore the toll or the death is more heavy on the men.
Yes, suppose you were correct that when migration is going on, more men are migrating compared to the women, and they leave behind the family in when the woman responsibility increases. And on that time, women are facing one type of problem. At the same time, men are also facing problem because they are shifting, they are coming to a new area, they are struggling for their income to the their basic amenities purpose. So need to be identified all these things, and then we can solve the problem. We only one identification, but we have a misconception that gender means the woman and only identification of woman problem. Obviously women face more problems, suppose which I mentioned that in the case of the water management, women face more problem, because though some changes comes out in the collection of the drinking water in the coastal areas, because they are collecting water from the very far areas, but still the women are facing more problem, because they are collecting all types of water, or they are responsible more. But men are also facing, because they need to rearrange their works to everything, or their economic burdens are increasing more, because they are arranging, if they indirectly involved in the water collection through the van service or other. So on that case, we need to identify in that type of problem in both cases.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Ahur. I'm receiving some questions on my chat box, so I will now direct it to all our panelists, and let's talk a little bit about these questions. So one question is, who should Bangladesh charge for the negative environmental impacts from climate change? Who wants to answer that? Dr. Rabbani, maybe you. Who should Bangladesh charge for the negative environmental impacts from climate change?
Yeah, sure. I can try to respond, because we have been saying, I have been participating in the climate negotiations since 2009, and we always have this clear position from the country, from LDCs, from G70 and China, and from other platforms. For example, Climate Action Network South Asia, Climate Action Network Bangladesh, International. The position is the climate is changing because of mainly the greenhouse gas emission, and which is actually occurring in all developed countries, which is Annex 1 countries and the developed countries. About 40 countries. So and recently, if you look at the emission trend in last 10 years, it looks like the China, India, Brazil, these countries are also emitting more. But what our clear position is, developed countries who are more responsible, in historically. So you have to pay for this mitigation and adaptation actions. So that is our clear position. And I see one more question. Regarding the allocation between adaptation and mitigation, we also have a clear position since 2007. From Bali Action Plan. In fact, our the Honorable Prime Minister also has a position regarding the allocation between adaptation and mitigation. Every time we attend the negotiation, we used to say we should have a balanced allocation. But unfortunately, we don't see this balanced allocation. We see, about 80% allocation goes for mitigation. Of course, on principle, mitigation should be the priority for developed country, for the entire world. But for Bangladesh, our priority is adaptation. This is clear message, because we have been and we are being impacted by climate change, adverse impacts, across the country. And our people are poor, and in the entire world, poor are the most victim and hardest hit. So they need to adjust with the adverse impact of climate change. They need to live with their own mechanism, with the all adaptation measures available in their country. So our position, clear position, is adaptation is our priority, and to address our adaptation, developed country has to provide the resources as we require. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I think my question has been answered as well on that respect. Thank you so much, Mr. Rabbani. The second question is, what elements are influencing farmers' alternate methods with climate adaptation in agro? I think Professor Halal, you will be discussing about agriculture, so we can come back to the question later, or you want to take that now? The question is, what elements are influencing farmers' alternative methods with climate adaptation in agriculture? So do you want to take this question?
Can I come back later during my presentation?
Sure, fantastic.
I would like to take later on. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. That's fantastic. Dr. Rabbani, there is this question about, is there a monitoring mechanism set by Bangladesh Bank to ensure the 5% target on green financing? Do we have anything like that? Is there any monitoring mechanism?
Well, I cannot give you, the exact mechanism, but I strongly believe that they must have a digital mechanism. It's the central bank, So, and they have provided this declaration to all 56 and 30 institutions. So they must have a digital monitoring mechanism in place. I believe that.
Okay. So we will discuss a lot more about this. There is also a question related to what can Bangladesh learn from the world. I will get back to that question. So, but let's move on now with our discussion. So I have with me now Professor Dr. Hilal Ahmed. So, sir, I can hear you clearly now. So our question to you is, what are the direct concerns we have in Bangladesh in agriculture production and adaptation for climate change, and also how climate change is affecting our economy in general, and how we should be mitigating these challenges? This question is particularly of interest to me because I keep on saying that whatever gains we're having now, those all could be negated due to adverse climatic situation that we're observing. So we might have a Podda bridge, but what happens after 10 years if there is always flooding? The roads will be all gone maybe. So yeah, over to you, sir, to discuss about our concerns on agriculture related to climate change. I will share your slide, which you have shared with me. Just give me a second.
I cannot share from my end, right?
So you can still try, but let me open it as well, so I can share it with you for your behalf. Sir, are you sharing? Yeah, I can. Hello? Okay, I'm sharing.
I'm not sharing. So
okay,
you can.
go ahead. I'm sharing.
Okay.
Go ahead, sir. Okay.
Right. You can hear me, right? Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to share my thoughts and specific two questions that you asked me to answer to. Before I do that, would it be okay, given that I'm coming from an educational institution here, a bit of debate seems like we're talking about climatic events or weather events, extreme events, rather than climate change as scientists are telling me what it is. So this is my plan. I will talk about a little bit of science, what climate change means. I'm not a scientist, I'm a humble economist, but this is what I have been told and I believe in that. So after that, I'll probably talk about one particular thing. Listening to my previous panelists, it seems like the government is on top of the issue, and we don't think there are any uncertainties about future, the how far, so that would guide us. So, but I'll illustrate some of the scientific, systematic uncertainties that we have to deal with it. And just to say, climate change is the mother of all uncertainties. Just to make sure, am I audible, loud and clear?
You're audible, sir. That's fine.
Can you hear me?
Please. We can hear you, sir.
Okay. Right. Let me move on. So after that, I'll talk about the options. So about the climate change, right?
Dr. Hilal, you're breaking up now. You're breaking up now.
Talking about whether Bangladesh will mitigate as well as adapt to climate change. So this is how climate change happens and change climate. One is a natural phenomenon. Another is human induced. This is the human induced part of it, which is concerning. And since in evolution, human has started, sorry. So we're not talking about any episode linking to human-induced climate, which are regular phenomenon, and observe it historically. When we talk about climate change or intensity of the extreme events, and also we are talking about an average, again, the emphasis is average increase in over a long period of time, right? So the point I was making is don't confuse climate change with a sporadic weather events, and disaster management is not adaptation to climate change as such, but it can inform us how to manage impacts of climate, how to deal with climate change. On that front, can I just clarify one more thing? You can see in my title that I'm talking about dealing with climate change, not overcoming climate risk. Overcoming means we can deal with all kinds of risks associated with climate change. We cannot. We can just make some planned adaptation, and then there could be still remaining risk, and we are vulnerable to that, and we have to deal with that as we go. The other thing I would like to make on this slide is it doesn't matter whether emission is coming from Bangladesh or from Europe or from America, it's all going into the atmosphere, and it's not, it has, I mean, if Bangladesh reduces its emission to zero, the global climate wouldn't really notice it, right? So it's important that the big emitters undertake big reduction in emissions to make a difference in the climate change, even if it is for Bangladesh, right? So with that sort of initial sort of introductory science of climate change, let me move on to the next slide. Right. So so far we have been talking about emissions, right? This table shows you emissions coming from where, right? So far the focus is on combustion emission and carbon dioxide in particular. We are looking at agriculture here, and you can see agriculture emits not only carbon dioxide in terms of burning fuels and all that, but it also mitigates a lot of methane and nitrous oxide. And these are very potent greenhouse gas emissions. Methane, 1 ton of methane is equivalent to about 32 tons of carbon dioxide. And nitrous oxide, 1 ton is equivalent to about 260 tons of CO2 equivalent. this is in terms of their global warming potential. So then we shouldn't undermine those sources and gases. And quite rightly, international negotiation, the Paris Protocol covered all those gases. Moving on to the next one. Right, here, I think most of the time we are sort of making a blame game, and my previous panelists also bluntly suggested that we are not responsible for greenhouse gas emissions. I would ask our viewers to look at cement, aluminum, chemicals. We use those. And we also use coming from India or other places, gas, oil. We burn them here, but they're brought here from other countries because we demanded that. So, outright 100% blame on development should take responsibility as well, because we are demanding those and we are using those things. You see all the panels and all that. Where is it coming from? Somewhere, and that somewhere is meeting emissions, and for us, because we're demanding it. So when I'm not defending the developed countries as such. I mean, go back to say 200 years when all Indian tracks are built. The metals come from where? England, right? India was building all sorts of steel as well. So steel manufacturing is not less emission. One of the emission intensive processing things. Same with alumina. Same with cement manufacturing. Right? We're using those things, and so if we bluntly say, "Oh, it's the source country is responsible for all that," then we're not very honest with science. Moving on. Yeah. Now we talked about a lot of climate change impacts. Right? You can see a lot of impacts here. For Bangladesh, I think the most concerning is the sea level rise and also temperature. And the other thing which is very important for us is the Himalayan ice sheets, right? If it melts, it's going to flood the whole river systems, and that is a very concerning one. Now, my question to the panel as well as other, do you know how much sea rise and when? What is the time? Do we know at a local level how much temperature? If we knew all those things, we could have adjusted ourselves and develop policies and set everything right, and we are happy. We have no idea, right? Science is not very clear yet, not settled about the increase in sea level, when it's happening, where it's happening, and how much. And oceanic system is so. Scientists have got good handle on atmospheric science, but when it comes to oceanic, there is so much sink in the ocean. They have no idea, right? They are still wondering what will happen if that sink sort of bursts and all the emissions that are in there comes out, and how quickly the world can be doomed and all that. So science is still working on it. And when you read the science of the science of climate change, they will talk about all these, lackings, all those limitations, and we should take into account those limitations while we are making policies. If you kindly move on. So don't pretend like those sharks that we know everything, and in 5 years' time we'll solve the problem. We know what the climate change is. We don't have that sort of feel. It's very uncertain. And talking about uncertainty, we'll see from the next few slides, what uncertainty means. The next one. Right. So, like I said, climate change is the mother of all uncertainties. There is a science side of it, even radiative forcing, right? Science is not very clear on that. There is some wedge, how much concentration will lead to how much increase in temperature. Regional projections, oh my God. All these climate models, they're huge models, global circulation models, right? The grid level, Bangladesh doesn't feature in it. So what do? We downscale those projections. And they're not just one projection, they're series of projections, right? So the uncertainties are huge, and their regional projections is even more problematic. So for Bangladesh, if we are to know what kind of climate change is happening over the next 20, 30, 40 years, we need to work on those things. How statistical methods being used to downscale the modeling results from the Hadley Center or Goddard Institute and all that. I don't know whether the government has spent enough money on developing that capacity, right? And talking about climate change impacts, I mean, this nature of impacts, most of the things that will impact us most are the what should I say, the extreme events, right? And science is very light on that. They can, these models, the projection model, GCM, they can talk about average global temperature. And this is average. We are not talking about a particular country or particular region. We are talking about global average, right? And also, this grid level, they can give you some grid level forecast, but to bring it down to the farm level or a village level, that is many years ahead of us. That's not there. And so in terms of impacts, it's very, very difficult. So what I want to say, emphasize that end of the day, climate change is about water, how we manage water. This is an example of how difficult it is to model climate change impacts. So there are three systems. We're talking about climate systems, and then biophysical systems and economic systems. It was a work, I was part of it. It's part of AgMed, and the global consortium. And so the GCM models, they're giving you only two things. One is temperature change, another one is precipitation, which is rainfall. And then these biophysical models, crop models, are taking those projections and trying to figure out about the land productivity. And then the economic models finally take land productivity inputs from the biophysical models and see what it means for human systems. And for every level, there are so much uncertainties, model variations and all that. To work out the impacts is mind-boggling. There are so many models, about 10 modeling groups from around the world. Ours was part of it, one of the models we used. And there's a whole issue of agricultural economics devoted to this publication, to this work. So I will ask the readers to see that. So the uncertainties is huge. That's what I meant to say. Please move on. Next slide, please. Right. So when we talk about adaptation, the first question is adaptation to what? So we need to know the impact, tell you with some certainty about average temperature. And then it's not at the regional level. It gives you at the GCM model grid level. And you have to translate that back to where it matters, right? So average temperature, rainfall, these are the two things mostly used by global impact modelers. And then the severity and frequency of extreme weather and climate events, these are the most problematic area for projections, right? This change in seasonality, shifting of cropping season and all sorts of things, the frequency of droughts, frequency of flooding and all that. It's at the regional level, it's even more scary. We don't have that information, to be honest. Someone can pretend that they have, but they're having just one or two scenarios or something like that, and it's changing. It's based on, and the scenario is based on human behavior. If human behavior changes, economic system changes, we emit more or less, that whole thing changes. So these are some indicative thing. It's not a guaranteed thing, right? So the uncertainty is there. Going on, the next one. Right. So just to give you a sense, right, how poorly we know the impact. I don't know whether Bangladesh, I'm sure there are agriculture agronomists, agriculture economists, they are looking into this. This is from a different place. It shows if there is 1 centigrade increase, 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature, there will be 4 to 7% decline in total factor productivity of food production, meaning, you're losing 7% of the production. And then, and mind it, relative to the industrial revolution, right? The pre-industrial level, our temperature has already increased by 1%, 1 degree Celsius by now, and we are targeting 1.5 related to that level. So we don't have much wiggle room there. Anyway, and in terms of milk production, you can see about 6% loss, just 1 degree increase. This is from heat stress and other things. Next one. Again, these are very rubbery numbers, right? And also not from Bangladesh experiment. So, and again, 1 to 2% increase in temperature, 15% decline in pasture production, right? And 12% decline in live weight gain of cattle. So cattle increases, so that increase will be reduced by about 12%, about 10, 1/10 would be 90% growth, not 100%. So again, we are talking about big allocation of funding, and government is doing this program and that program. But shouldn't we also consider where adaptation is happening when it comes to agriculture? It happens at the farm level, and it's not just one-off; it's ongoing, right? So are farmers ready to adapt to climate change, to seasonal variation, sudden surge in flood water, or any other things that we are talking about? I'm sure farmers seen weather in the past and they make adjustment and all that. But we are talking about a different paradigm here, right? At least next few decades, things can change dramatically. And in that context, can I just also remind our audience that whatever emissions we are doing today wouldn't have any impact on the future 10 years weather, because it's already locked into the system. Once we emit 1 ton of CO2, it stays in the atmosphere for over 100 years. 1 ton of methane stays there for 30 years. So they are sort of accumulating over time. So whatever we're facing today has already happened 30 years back. So some degree of adaptation is a must. We have to be prepared with the climate change, right, and adaptation from that perspective. So next slide. Again, this is very high level, should I say, options, if you like. What sort of options are there for farmers to adapt to climate change? In case of cropping, of course, different cultivars, right? It should be heat resistant, frost resistant, drought resistant. When farmers should uptake it, and we have to do the agriculture extension to teach them how to do all these things. Fertilizer use, water application times, all will change because of the seasonal shifting. And then when you talk about fertilizer use, right, or irrigation, for example, and I didn't have time to explain all those things, but in our rice production, we flood the land, and through that process, all those crop residues and all that, they're rotten, and they generate methane. So if we teach farmers to do intermittent irrigation, do some irrigation, water it, and then dry it, then water it, then dry it in a very scientific way, then we reduce irrigation water and also reduce emissions. So that kind of technology is already developed. It's about going to the farmers and letting them know this is going to look after your budget, as well as give you it will help the environment. It will reduce the emissions, right? So that technology is a win-win technology. It's important. So carbon, not too much, because all the organic matters in the soil will be using as soil nutrients and will help grow crops. So that kind of technology is, again, very standard, and we need to let our farmers know that this is a possibility. Livestock, again, there are a lot of other options there, but the important thing is farmers need to know when to go for which breed and how to manage the changing climate and all that. We need information, basically, right? And serious agriculture extension work. Moving on.
Professor Herald, we need to finish in 2 minutes.
can go on. I think here just one point I would like to make. I made it already. That is the Bangladesh Delta Plan. It meant to be a living document, and I was interpreting that there would be a serious consortium of research organizations. It will galvanize research work and an ongoing, work, because the climate scenarios, the model, they're going to change. And we, like I said, we don't have our local level information, and we need to have that, and we need to develop the capacity. It's not just one-off exercise, and I'm sure the government will revisit that idea. On that, I don't have much else to say, but right. So again, I made the point, the one in red, that we're talking about sea level rise, but there's one or two numbers that start, but that's not the science that telling us that this number is with a probabilistic. It's a probabilistic statement, and that can change over time, as we know, new science, robust science, and all that. Things can change. So we need to have that capacity. So I'm trying to, allude all of you to understand that our greatest challenge is the lack of information, right, at the level that we need it. And I'm not sure, the last slide I have put down few questions for all of us, right? So what we learned in the past 2 years, we learned that if our action is knowledge-based and science-led, the COVID experience that we have experienced, we can deal with a serious problem. So it has to be good science, robust science-led. Scientists are telling us that, yeah, it's time to act, and the policy making should be based on knowledge, not other considerations. And I'm just wondering, I don't know, I haven't got got much knowledge about the landscape, education landscape, but I'm just wondering how many universities are offering climate change courses or degrees. I don't know whether BRAC is offering any, but I'm not aware of any at North-South University. There might be one, but that's not enough. If climate change is a threat, is a game-changing threat, then it should be mainstream and knowledge offering course, right? And also, I don't know how our school curriculum deals with climate change issues. We are teaching our young kids and all who will be actually facing the brunt of the climate change. They go up to what they're facing in next 10, 15, 20 years, 30 years time. I don't know. And then on the communication side, of course, language is important. If you say it's threatening our activities, our economy, I would like to leave is deal with uncertainties, make some flexibility, because uncertainties mean we cannot. Flexible policy making is the name of the game. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much. That was quite a lot of knowledge packed in there. Important point made about importance to distinct and climate change, and also a very important point made about integrating climate change education. We might hear, I mean, if we get time, we will hear from other people, but for the sake of time, I need to move on. So our final guest today, just give me a second. So, Dr. Nandan Mukherjee, are you there with me?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Can you hear me properly?
Very clear, loud and clear. You have been listening. You have been doing an active listening for the last 1 hour. So Dr. Nandan Mukherjee, you are a final speaker. So I would also additionally task you to give some final remarks. But the big question to you is, what are the vulnerabilities that Bangladesh is facing because of its geological position? We have heard from Professor Hilal, that there are, risks that are peculiar to different countries. So you can shed some light on the specific to Bangladesh. And also, you know that this will be presented as a policy paper, and also Financial Express is covering. So if you could give us 4 to 5 key policies that the Bangladesh government should implement, as well as for the private sector and NGOs, and for the academia in Bangladesh, if you could lay down some policy directions. Over to you, Dr. Nandan Mukherjee.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to have you attend this important session. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to participate on this panel. In response to the first question about vulnerability, may I not rehash the hazard exposure and vulnerability issues raised by the keynote speaker and all the other panelists. Instead, I'll try to return to the main point, which is why Bangladesh and the rest of the world are still vulnerable to climatic risk and weather variability, despite the fact that we have already done so much, as my colleagues have mentioned, to address it. The second part of my talk, again, would be a non-academic argument about climate politics, which is further linked to climate justice. I'll start with my past. When I was about 18 years old, I first heard about something called climate change or global warming. Apparently, that was something humans had created by our way of living. Then I was taught to turn off the lights to save energy and to recycle paper to save resources. I still can remember thinking at that time that it was a very strange that human who claimed to be the best animal species among others could be capable of changing the Earth's climate. Because if we were, and if it was really happening, we would not be talking about anything else. As soon as you turn on the TV or roam around the social media, everything would be around that, right? Headlines, radio, newspapers, you'd never read or hear about anything else. For example, headlines should be definitely different from what Shakib Khan or Porimoni would be doing at Mawa Ghat for eating Hilcha in a restaurant, as if there was a world war going on. But no one at the time barely talked about it. And I don't think it has changed till now. If we just look into the vulnerability of Bangladesh or hazard exposure, our northwestern region is susceptible to drought, north central region to flood, northeastern region to flash flood, south, all the southern zone are affected by salinity, sea level rise, and storm surge. Professor Ainul Nishad, my mentor, he often says that Bangladesh is the laboratory for natural disasters. And my colleagues have well addressed the impacts and the vulnerability concerns. Just to further add, one storm can kill 200,000 people in a single year in 1992. Thousands of hectares of land in the southern region has become unsuitable for agriculture. Previous speakers have already mentioned about these endless charades of ever-growing exposure and vulnerability of the families, communities, and other species living in the least developed country or small island states, or any other type of ecosystem that you can mention. Everyone is suffering. If burning fossil fuels, I'm echoing with the moderator, was so bad that it threatened our very existence, how could we just continue like before? Why were there no restrictions? Why we couldn't make it illegal? To me, that question did not add up or taken care with appropriate seriousness. It is too unreal. Later, when I started my PhD, I became ill because I went to one of the islands and heard stories all about loss and damages, people dying, mothers losing their son and children. And I fell into depression. I could not sleep properly for seeing bad dreams. And I stopped working on my PhD. I stopped going to work. In few months, I lost weight. I was diagnosed with chronic diseases due to anxiety and depression. I used to see the face of a young mother who lost her child in the flood water, and everybody blamed her for her carelessness, not for climate change. Then I started rethinking about the value of doing this kind of academic research or this kind of pep talks, where scope is limited to publishing academic papers or not directly influencing people's lives and their respective vulnerability. For those, like my first children, who were born in 2019, who are on the spectrum, almost everything is black and white. He is not very good at lying. And he usually don't enjoy participating in this kind of social game that the rest of us seem so fond of. A virtual living around the social media where we love living the life of other people and entertainers. And we never allow ourselves to live the life of those who are really bearing the brunt of climate change and weather extremes in different parts of the world. We sympathize, but we don't want to live that life. I think in many ways that like my son, that the autistic are the normal ones, and the rest of the people like us are pretty strange, especially when it comes down to the sustainability crisis, where everyone keeps saying climate change is an existential threat, that most important issue of all, and yet they just carry on like before. We just carry on like before. We love blaming others. We don't want to change our lives. We just want to blame others. My boy and I don't understand, yet I don't understand that if the emission have to stop, then we must stop the emissions, because we can't trade emissions with money or any other goods in the world, but we are doing that. To me and my young boy, that is black and white. There are no gray areas when it comes down to survival. Either we go on as a civilization or we don't. That's the only decision we have to take. We have to change if we want to live. We have to change our consumption pattern. We have to look into the environment the way as we are looking now. We have to change it. Rich countries like USA need to start reducing emissions by at least 15% per year to reduce the loss and damage of the countries who are bearing it, like Bangladesh. And that is so that we can stay below a 2-degree warming target. Yet, as the IPCC has recently demonstrated, aiming instead of for 1.5 degrees Celsius would significantly reduce the climate impacts. But we can only imagine what that means for reducing emissions. You think that the media and everyone, every leaders in the country would be talking about nothing else. But even in the Glasgow, they barely mentioned that. They talked about it, but they didn't do much. Nor does everyone ever mention the greenhouse gases already locked in the system. We can't revert back to the original. It's irreversible. Not that air pollution is hiding our warming. So that when we stop burning fossil fuels, we already have an extra level of warming, perhaps as high as 0.5 to 1.1 degrees Celsius. And in the coming days, if we stop emitting today, the warming would be more than 2 degrees Celsius. That's what the researchers are saying. Furthermore, does hardly anyone speak about the fact that we are in the midst of the 6th mass extinction. The publication in the Science rate today is between 1,000 and 10,000 times higher than what it seems as normal. Nor does hardly anyone ever speak about the aspect of equity or climate justice. We're talking about money, how much compensation we need, but do we talk about the equity of that lady who lost her son, not for any other reason other than it is already clearly stated everywhere in the Paris Agreement, which is absolutely necessary to make work, not only in Bangladesh, but on a global scale. We have learned from COVID that vaccinating the rich countries doesn't help. We have to act in a global scale. That means that rich countries need to get down to zero emission with today's emission speed. And so poorer countries can have a chance to heighten their standard of living by building some of these infrastructures that they already have built, such as roads, schools, hospitals, clean drinking water, electricity, and so on. Because we can't, how can we expect countries like India, Nigeria?
Lost you. Sorry, I lost you. So anyways, you're back. So thank you so much. I mean, we have run out of time, but I mean, to round this discussion up, may I have all my panelists on the screen, please? There with me. Can you come on video? Hello? I'm not sure. Seems like my screen is frozen.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, fantastic. But I can't hear any of you. So I can't see Zareen. I can't see. Okay. So great. I can see you now, Mr. Rabbani, Professor Halal. So just a closing round of questions, one by one. I'll go to each of you. So I think, I mean, there was a central theme, I mean, about allocation of funding between adaptation and mitigation. And Mr. Rabbani made a clear point that mitigation, that challenge is for the West, I mean, the 40 countries that are creating these greenhouse gases. So their penalty is to support us to adapt. I think that was the response that I got. I think it was a very clear message. But on that regard, I think what was coming out is that Bangladesh needs to do more to, let's say, get finance, but also to manage the funding properly and more efficiently. We could not discuss about fund management much, but I think that's a very important point, which I was listening in between the line, that fund management would be key. But I think all of you have really explained all the very many projects that are going on mitigation and adaptation. There are also other projects coming in. Oishi, you made a point about this, the boulders, right? I mean, all these new trees that would be planted and so on and so forth. So a lot of, I mean, actions are going there, but proper management and also the question about how much the risk is mitigated. I think we also need to trace that. We need to see over time that Bangladesh is facing less and less challenges while our adaptation is improving. I think that's what I was listening. So my final question to all of you is one important message that you will give to the people who are listening. What is essential policy that needs to be undertaken to support Bangladesh's response to climate change? So that's my question, and I will go to each of you. So what is your suggestion? What is one policy direction that you make with regards to climate change? Jering, over to you.
Thank you so much. So I was listening to everyone, and it was a really, really interesting discussion from everyone. Got to know a lot of new things as well. So from my perspective, I think improved monitoring mechanism system is a very good thing that we country, because even though we are working so much on climate change over the past few years, but we still don't have a workable MRV system that can actually measure our progress or our what we have achieved so far. Also, I think a proper database is important, because we are doing so much work, but when we are trying to find something holistically, we cannot actually get what we are searching for. So in that case, a proper database system can also be in place to ensure effective monitoring. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That's very important point, monitoring and data. Dr. Rabbani.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think, since we have participation, diverse participation from the academic area and research NGOs, government probably, if I'm not wrong, and even I believe some of the young students are also there. So one thing that is extremely important is if you have done something to reduce the greenhouse gas emission at the household level, at the individual level. You see, we do often, have some action which increases the wastage, and we often, do not ensure the efficiency of the resource utilization at the household level, individual level, and which actually increases the emission from each of the persons and the family level. So it's better to take some of the initiative at individual level and household level, so that you can reduce your emission. And if you just Google how to reduce your emission, you will get hundreds of options from the internet. So I don't want to give you any prescription, but please do Google and find what you can do at the individual level and household level to reduce the emission carbon footprint that you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And on that note, actually, we did have good participation from students, and I would thank Young Economist Forum from North University who are giving us very thoughtful questions. And it does show that our future generation, they're really focused on this issue of climate change, and they want to learn more. And you have just given them a suggestion to do more. So over to Nandan Mukherjee. What would be your one suggestion for policy action? Mr. Mukherjee, are you there? I think I've lost him. Professor Halal, over to you, sir. What would be your?
Can I indulge myself to a few comments, and then I give you get back to you about the one suggestion? Is that okay? Or you want?
Okay.
I'm happy either way.
Okay, so go ahead.
So first thing is, we are talking about adaptation. Adaptation takes place at different scales, at the international level, at the national level, at the regional level, right? At the shire level, at the village level, and at the farm level, end of the day. So I think so much has been happening at the government level. We are missing, we are probably blinded the need by the gravity of the work and all that, right? And haven't been focusing much on the ground level, but it matters the most. So that's the first comment. The second comment is, I would ask Dr. Rabbani to read a book by a famous Harvard PhD and also a worker there. His name is Garner Wagner, and his book is Will the Planet Notice? How Smart Economics Can Save the World. Yes, individually we can do a lot of things, but that wouldn't add up to the needs of mitigation, right? We can do a lot of things and nobody will notice. The planet will notice. The humongous task that we have in before us will not be managed by decentralized decision-making and saving 1 cent here and a few watts there. It has to be government coordinated, internationally coordinated effort. So don't lose sight of that. Yes, we can do a lot of things, but it has to be done at that level if we want to make any change to climate or mitigate climate change. So that's the 2 points I would like to make. And the core thing that you asked is make climate change education the mainstream rather than in the periphery. So that's my suggestion. People need to know, right, what sort of problems are there the planet is facing and the future generation will be facing. They are the, and you can see the younger people are coming out, right? And they're very vocal. So we who lived a very purposeful life and all that, we probably run out our use by date. It's the younger generations who should take leadership going forward. And so education, that's my suggestion.
Thank you so much, Professor Halal. Thank you, Mr. Rabbani. Thank you, Zareen. Thank you to Dr. Mukherjee and Ms. Zahoor. So thank you to C3R for helping us to organize today's session. Thank you, everyone who has joined. Thank you to everyone who have listened to us from all over the world. Bangladesh Miracle is a webinar dialogue series brought to you together with the Department of Economics, North South University and Financial Express, and together with our thematic partners and our communication. So we thank you to all of us, and we are working in bringing the knowledge of Bangladesh to mine the achievements of Bangladesh and also to lay forward the policies for moving Bangladesh ahead. So thank you all for your contribution. Looking forward to having you all in our next session on 23rd April on Livestock.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Excellent. Thank you so much.
Take care. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Much enjoyed.
Thank you so much for nice presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.